Today we are going to be talking about use case narratives. My name is Emma Lefroy. First, we are going to talk about what a use case is, the importance of use cases, and how to create a use case. Why use use case narratives? Every company or organization that has a system has most likely created a use case narrative. And with most of us being technology majors, we will all see them during our career. A use case narrative is used to kind of help create the system and organize it as it goes. So what is a use case narrative? A use case narrative is typically used when creating computer systems. It describes the interaction between an actor or a category of users to achieve a goal of observable value. A use case narrative can also be thought of as a roadmap for creating the system. It tells you where to go, how to get there, and what happens when the road is blocked, and other paths to take. The importance of use case narratives. Use case narratives encourage common agreements about system requirements. So when developing a system, it can be very easy to have two people creating it, think they're on the same page, and be slightly off. When creating these use case narratives, it helps bridge those gaps between the two. It also reveals process alternatives, exceptions, undefined paths, and outstanding issues. So when we were talking about the roadmap as a use case, this also provides alternative processes. So when a road is blocked, it will give you another road to take. Same thing with a use case. If a system path is blocked, it will find a different path. Exceptions are for when there are certain issues within a system, then an exception is thrown. So say you can put a no override to the system. That works as an exception. Undefined paths are paths that have not been written out yet. So a lot of times when you're making these use case narratives, you'll figure out a path of the system that has not been addressed yet. And also outstanding issues. If you find things that haven't been addressed or cannot be addressed in the current state of the system, they need to be fixed. Use case narratives discover the gaps within the system as it stands, and this helps completely bridge those together before the system is implemented and is used in the user's hands with issues. And it also helps prioritize the work. So what parts of the system are most important to work? Moving on to use case narrative. This is what a use case narrative looks like plain. It's the skeleton of it. And the first steps in using a use case narrative, you decide the steps you want to outline. So you pick what part of the system, what process you want to discuss. You determine the priority of the process to figure out if it's a high, low, if it's an important part of the system, or if it's more like a background feature. You also determine the other parts of the system that's interacting with it. So a category of users of employees will also interact with equipment or vice versa. You also describe the use case process. So through this use case, which will be shown in an example later, there is steps that the system takes to complete the process. You discuss what is true in order for this process to occur, and you also decide what causes the problem or process. From there, you go and discuss the course of events in the process. So it goes back and forth between the actor and the system and seeing how they interact with each other. Also, the results of the process. So what is the outcome results that you get from the system? And then what constraints, rules, and specifications for the process. So constraints of has to be done in this many seconds. It has to only give this many results. Or you have to have this certain qualification to access these documents. Things like those are what you have to determine during use case narratives. And then you also outline any outlying issues that you have found through the process. Continuing, we are going to be moving on to an example of a use case narrative and how to fill one out when you're actually using a real process. So for our example, we are going to be creating a use case for a realty company. The user wishes to retrieve property information about a certain property that is in the system. So to begin, you can see that the use case narrative has been named. It is retrieve property information. Pretty simple, straightforward. It lets you know exactly what the process outline is. Next, the use case ID. So it IDs each use case so they can be identified. And also the priority. So since this is a realty company, their retrieving property information is going to be a high priority for their system. So it's marked as high. The source of this use case is the system's request. And the business actor is the employee. So the employee is trying to retrieve the information, and the primary system actor is the system. The description is an employee retrieves information from the database. It pretty much, as a description, just tells you in more detail what the process is that the use case is outlining. Preconditions are things that must be true in order for this process to occur. So for this, it'd be property information is in the database and that the user is logged in. And the trigger that causes this process is the employee clicking search properties. So with this, your first half of your use case is done, and we will be moving on to the second part. The second part of the use case starts with the course of actions, and this occurs for the typical course of actions. So what would happen if there were no problems found by the system? So the system begins by the employee pressing the start button or the search button, which was indicated as the trigger. Then the system displays the search page. And then in response, with the search page up, the actor, which is the employee, enters the property ID number that they wish to retrieve. Once they do this, the system responds by searching the property with the property ID from the property table or part of the database that holds the information about properties. And from there, once the system finds a matching ID, it will display the property information. So as you can see in the course of events, it shows the interaction between the system and the actor, which is the employee, and how they interact with each other and what they do in response to each other. After you do the typical course of actions, you also have to indicate any alternative courses that may occur. So for this case, if the employee had entered an invalid ID, the system would have responded by asking them to resubmit a property ID. And the conclusion of this use case is that the customer was able to retrieve the information about the property that they wished to retrieve. Business rules are back to the constraints and stuff like that, and it's only employees can search the database. So someone cannot just walk in and look at it. You have to be logged in as an employee, and you have to be an employee of the company. And assumptions made about the system or the use case is that the property ID is unique. So there are not two properties with the same ID, which that will cause problems in the system if that occurs. Moving on, you can see the completed version of a use